My name is Steve from Mechanical and Pump Service, here to discuss your hydromatic explosion-proof pump system for the new training center and to go over the control panel involved in. The pump selection is a hydromatic 2 horsepower submersible pump system with a cast iron construction and an explosion-proof connection box. In your O&M manual, if you look down, you'll see the construction of it. This is a dual seal pump, which means it has 2 mechanical shaft seals to protect the motor from infiltration of water into a chamber with a moisture seal sensor, which is propped into the panel to set off an alarm. This is a grinder pump, so it has a dual set of rotating stainless steel grinders, 1 stationary set in the bottom and 1 coaxial cutter up on the shaft, which are both reversible. The electrical connections from the motor to the panel are sealed in epoxy and rated for a Class C and D explosion-proof atmosphere. Flip a little further, you'll see an outline of the wet well system itself, showing the pump installed with floats in the rail system. And the pumps are installed on what they call a TOPS single guide rail system, which basically just aids you in guiding the pump in and out without having to enter the chamber. There's a breakdown for parts of that stainless steel system on the next page. All the parts are either bronze or stainless steel, and the parts are readily available for replacements. Alright, the pump itself is pretty self-explanatory. It's a submersible pump, so there's no maintenance involved in it except for pulling the pump up once a year to inspect the cutters for wear and to take an amp reading on the motor to make sure that the full load amps fall within range. At the same time that you pull up the pump and test it once a year, you want to test all the floats and control systems to make sure that they're still operating properly. There's a parts breakdown for the grinder pump in the O&M, and as long as a phone number and address where parts are readily available. Your spare parts list is as follows. You have 1 complete seal kit, which includes O-rings and mechanical seals, as well as bearings for 1 pump. Usually on these pumps, depending on what you're pumping for grit and solids, your mechanical seals and your cutter rings can last anywhere from 3 to 5 years. That's why you inspect them once a year. The cutters you can flip and get twice as long out of them. The mechanical seals, when the seal sensor goes and starts getting water infiltration into the seal chamber, it's advised to change both seals and the oil and reinstall the pump to protect the motor, which should be anywhere from 3 to 5 years before you even have to worry about that. Now, that's pretty much your pump, which is pretty much self-explanatory and stays underwater. And we'll go more of that outside when I show you the wet well system. Now, your control panel for the system is made by D&B Wiring out of Pennsylvania. It has hour meters, handoff auto switches, phase monitor to monitor incoming power, thermal overloads on the contactors for each pump, and an alternating relay which has a lead lag selector switch involved on it. It also has time delay relays on the power transfer switch to monitor the phase rotation when you switch from backup power to regular, because sometimes you can get a trip in power and it'll trip everything on you. When we go outside to inspect the panel, Dennis from D&B Wiring will point out the different components and we'll go over them. If you flip into the panel O&M, we have a complete set of wiring diagrams. Wiring diagrams showing the relation electrically of everything in the panel. Alright, as well as all the wires being numbered and lettered so they're easy to follow. Alright, there's also a complete list of manufacturers for all the parts that are in there, including who supplied the hour meters and where spare parts can be bought. Now, the system operates on a float system, which means in the pit you have 5 mechanical floats that are wired into the panel. Now, they are set on what they call an intrinsically safe system, which means the floats are operating on DC voltage while line power is on the opposite side to prevent explosions. If you look in the bottom right hand side of the panel when we go outside, he'll point out the orange intrinsically safe box. Now, you have 5 floats. The lowest to highest it goes, low water off, lead pump on, lag pump on, and high water. The high and low floats do set off alarms, and there are indicator lights on the panel for each one, as long as an alarm silence button. Neither one of these will turn the pumps off. What they do is they just let you know that you have a low or high water condition. All right. The system operates by the wet well coming up and closing the off float and then closing the lead float, which puts either pump 1 or pump 2, whichever one is in the lead at the time, on, and then it will pump down until the off float opens. If something happens to the lead pump, such as a tripped overload or the pump is removed for service, the system will operate on one pump without doing anything extra, because what will happen is the wet well will come up to the next float, which is the lag float, and will turn on the second float, the second pump. Now the alternator does have a lead lag switch A and B, which will put that pump in lead all the time, so they can operate at a slightly lower wet well level if that's what you want. It's not really necessary, but if you remove a pump for service, it does help not pull that contactor in. Now the panel is also equipped with a condensate heater set for 50 degrees to keep condensate from forming in the wintertime, as we all have seen that with our outside panels. After the list of manufacturers, we have the miscellaneous and the warranty list in the back of the O&M. So now, that's pretty much your panel on the inside. Now we'll take a trip outside and Dennis will go over the different components and how they actually look, and then I'll show you the wet well and the position of the pumps. All right, thank you.
What we're trying to do here is explain the operation of this control panel. You'll find my name for the company that I represent here for technical information or equipment that you might need. Okay? Each of the pumps are set up identical to each other. Each of them has an hour meter, handoff auto, selector switch, a pump on indicating light, a pump circuit breaker overload fault, a seal fault indicator, a temperature fault, a fault reset button is used for both of them. Alarm silence the alarm horn, which is located on the side of the panel. Alarms, a high level alarm, low level alarm. Right? Normally you would have the pump in the automatic mode, which means as the level in the wet well fills, it'll come up to the pump on level, which is the third float, and turns on the lead pump. It'll go down to the pump off level, which is the second float, and shut the pump off. On the next cycle, the other pump will turn on. If for some reason the pump faults, one of the indicating lights will come on, the high level alarm, the alarm beacon will come on and sound the horn. To silence the horn, you hit the alarm silence. To reset the faults, you have to look and see what the fault condition was. Right? A temperature sense will reset with the fault reset. The seal fault indicates there's probably an issue with the pump itself, and you need to confer with the pump owner's manual on how to resolve that. The pump circuit breaker overload fault indicates it's a problem with the overload or the circuit breaker inside the panel. I'll show you more details on that in a minute. The pump on indicating light just says that the pump is on. Right? So we have a high level alarm. That means for some reason a high level float has been made. It should not be made unless there's a fault or for some reason the pumps are not pumping as much as what they should be. The low level fault says that in the automatic mode the pump stayed on too long and continued to run when the pump off float should have shut it off. You'll have to see why it continued to run. Right? Now we're going to open the door and show you the inside of the panel. Let's talk about components. This is the main disconnect. It's a non-fused that turns power off to the panel. Each of the pumps has their own circuit breakers here or here. It also has an auxiliary that says that the pump is tripped for some reason, and if it did trip, the same with an overload on the starter, then what happens is, again, it's this pilot light that wants to turn on, So it's one of those two things that's showing you the alarms. Okay. Now, there's a control transformer here, which takes it from 460 to 120 for our control power, and its own circuit breaker to protect it. For this 110 volt side, it has its own circuit breaker, which if it's tripped, the whole unit shuts down. Okay. We have an alternator, so that each pump cycle, it'll switch between pump 1 to pump 2. If for some reason you want one of the pumps to be the lead pump, you would switch it to either A or B for it to stay, so that pump 1 is the lead pump all the time, or pump 2, depending on what you'd want. Okay? There's also a 3-phase monitor, which is this device. Now, with it on, and you have the correct voltage, you see that there's a little light on. It's difficult to see in the sunlight. That tells you you have the correct voltage. Okay? Now, if you don't, none of the pumps will run. It simply shuts off. Right? Now, we have a thermostat here that we have set for 50 degrees. That's to keep the panel somewhat warm. It's not really an issue in this climate. Right? We also have some motor temp timers here that prevents nuisance tripping of the over temp on the motor. Normally that's when the power cycles on and off. Right? You have interface relays, which are these little finder relays, and as you can see, they all have little indicating lights on them to say that they are powered. That tells you there's 110 volts to the coil. Right? Now, as the level in the wet well fills, more and more of these lights on the intrinsically safe barrier are going to come on. Right now we have 2 of them. Right? Which means that the low is made and the low. When this light comes on, that is the lead pump call. This is the lag pump call. General maintenance. What should happen after the first 6 months is to open the cabinet, turn off the power, and make sure the connections are tight. If you don't find any problems, then once a year after that. Okay. One other thing I want to go over again is, and demonstrate, is if you lose an overload, you're going to get a little indicating light on the starter, the alarm light is lit, and you have the horn. Okay, now to get rid of the horn, alarm silence, the alarm light stays on and the beacon until the problem has been resolved. To resolve a starter overload problem, you have to hit the blue button, it'll reset. Okay, if the circuit breaker is tripped, to resolve that, again, you would hit alarm silence, okay, and turn the breaker back on. And that will reset the panel, and the panel will be able to start. These are all the automatic modes. Now, in the hand position, the pump will start. As you can see, it's on, and it will run until you shut it off. There is no off levels in the hand position. The faults will shut it off, such as an overload, a seal, or motor temp, okay? But that's the only shutoffs. Please do not run the pump for more than a couple minutes when it's dry. You will damage the pump. The hour meters keep track of how many hours the pump has been run. They are non-resettable. Again, if you have any questions, call the above number. There is a 2-year warranty on this panel. One further item is when you're closing the panel, to be sure that both these latches are locked tight to keep the water out of the panel. This concludes the information about this panel.
Hi, my name's Steve from Mechanical Pump, here to talk to you about your Hydromatic explosion-proof grinder pumps. If you look down here, you'll see we got two horsepower explosion-proof grinder pumps set up on a tops rail system for easy removal. Our grinder pumps are set up with a dual cutter system consisting of a stationary cutter and a coaxial cutter, both which are reversible, and the explosion-proof connection at the top, which has the double epoxy electrical conduits. The pump has seal sensor and motor sensors and a separate wire coming up through the conduit, and the motor sensors are also through the conduit. The TOPS rail system is mainly, if you look at the top here, they're just guideposts. And as you follow it down, the pump sits on what they call a pitless adapter for easy removal. Check valves come up with the pump, and you have a second set of check valves in the pump valve chamber. All right. To lift the pumps up, use a crane or a chain fault and just pull it straight up, coming up slow just in case the pump gets hung up on anything as it comes up. You want to check the pumps at least once a year. Taking amperage readings, pulling the pumps up, and checking the cutters to make sure that they don't have any wear. If they do, you just swap them over. It's also a good idea once you put them back down to take an amp reading to make sure that the motors are still within full load amp range. The system is run by 5 floats, which once a year when you test the pumps, you want to check to make sure the floats are still working properly. And then basically inspect all the piping while it's running to make sure we have no leaks or breaks. All right. Other than pulling it up once a year to check the pumps, these pumps will maintenance free. Just ignore them unless the alarm goes off. All right. When you look down, you want to just make sure the pumps stay submerged underwater. All right. You don't want to run the pumps out of the water for any length of time. You also don't want to constantly be drawing air into the bottom of them. So test the float system, make sure everything works, keep the water in the pit. And that's it for your pumps. All right, got any questions? Just call. Thanks. Okay. The stainless steel cutters on the pumps, which are reversible so you can get twice as long out of them, they usually last between 4 or 5 years on the side, depending on how much grit you're pumping. In a typical sewer application like this, you should get about 5 years out of them. Flop them over, you should get about 10. The pumps are dual sealed. All right, with a seal chamber and seal sensor, which, depending on also how much grit you're pumping, you should get anywhere from 3 to 4 years out of a seal. All right, and the chains, the seal on these pumps, they do have to be removed and the oil drained out because they are pressurized, and then put back in, which takes roughly about an hour. So that's the only maintenance that there is.